A whopping 76 side quests completed, 32 notorious marks hunted, 1 ultimate weapon created. Take all of what I just said and double it, because I gotta do it again for New Game Plus mode, aka Final Fantasy mode. 24 orchestration roles obtained, 38 iconic abilities unlocked and mastered, and 50 trophies unlocked, all of which took over 84 hours and 2 full complete playthroughs. Hey everyone, I'm Jordan the Completionist, and this is the show where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. Final Fantasy XVI is the latest in Square Enix's long-running series about beautiful moody boys and their adventures. It's an action-packed game with some weird pacing issues and extremely dense lore, but it still has that Final Fantasy magic that shines through no matter what the combat looks like or how many cutscenes exist. This may not be the RPG that you're expecting. In fact, a lot would argue it's barely an RPG at all. In the conventional sense, that is. But I absolutely think it is a huge RPG, one where I truly believe in its hype. And that's why I'm giving this game my completionist rating of completed. So come with me on this journey that is Final Fantasy XVI.
Yes! All glory goes to the winner! Over. Wake up! Last one standing wins. KO!
I know you're looking at the runtime thinking, holy crap, how much is there to say about Final Fantasy XVI? Longtime fans of the show know that when it comes to Final Fantasy, I don't mess around. So just get ready. It's a big one. Be patient. Watch the whole thing, hopefully. Let me know. Quick disclaimer before we get the ball rolling here. I'm going to be doing my best to keep things spoiler light, but there's pretty much a guarantee that you will see footage of late game mechanics, spells, locations, that kind of stuff. I'm definitely going to be hitting on some of the late game plot things as well, because this game has one of the most full circle stories I've ever experienced. If you're still working your way through this massive game and you still want some opinions, check out my impressions video. With that said, let's start. Why is Final Fantasy XVI considered one of the most divisive yet one of the best titles of 2023, with this year already being kind of a banger year for games? To be clear, we get games in or related to the Final Fantasy franchise pretty frequently, like Crisis Core Reunion or Theater Rhythm Curtain Call, just in the last few months alone. But a mainline numbered Final Fantasy is still something special. It's an event, a Super Bowl. 16 games is a lot for a franchise, but look at the release schedule from game to game. Several years go by, so when a new one shows up, the world stops, watches, plays, and most importantly, judges. We expect to be transported to a world filled with magic, wonder, political intrigue, memorable characters, fantastic moments, amazing music, and most importantly, great gameplay. I think Final Fantasy XVI mostly delivers on all of these things, but apparently not everyone feels the same way. Since this game's release, I've been torn over what to feel through and through. As I've been completing it, I've read dozens of reviews, watched hours and hours of videos, read up on Reddit posts all over our Final Fantasy XVI, and I've thought about this game in relation to other Final Fantasies, which, to be clear, I try normally not to do this. I try to stay in my own lane with regarding to that specific Final Fantasy. But I had to look around for this one because my conclusion? Man, I don't know. There are definitely some issues with 16, but almost all of my complaints changed the more I completed it. This is one of the more satisfying completion experiences I've had lately, but this also has one of the most open to interpretation endings of a game of this scope. In the years leading up to the release, fans were either very hyped or extremely disappointed to learn who was behind the next installment in Square Enix's tentpole series. Final Fantasy XVI was developed by Creative Business Unit 3, led by producer Naoki Yoshida, more casually known to the world as Yoshi P. For me, I was immediately bought in. Yoshi P has worked on a lot of games, but what stuck out to me was that he was one of the main folks responsible for A Realm Reborn, Final Fantasy XIV, a total reworking of the MMO Final Fantasy XIV game. I have put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into Final Fantasy XIV over the last several years, and I love the themes and the storytelling of that game. So I was very interested to see what Yoshi P and his team would bring to Final Fantasy XVI. But Yoshida and his MMO storytelling expertise were not the only things to keep an eye on here. Square Enix also tapped Ryota Suzuki of Devil May Cry 5 fame to work on the combat. Almost every entry in the Final Fantasy series has different combat mechanics, and Final Fantasy XVI leads hard into being an action game above all else. And for some, this is simply too much. I don't want to make a whole thing about this, but here we are. I don't really care about this being an action game and what that means for Final Fantasy as a whole. Every Final Fantasy is different. They haven't been fully turn-based for what feels like almost 20 years now. This series has always been about experimenting with mechanics as new gameplay trends emerge, and I think that's a good thing overall. Almost every numbered entry is set in a new world, and the gameplay reflects that. For me, it all comes down to whether or not you enjoy the story and its combat. Final Fantasy XVI jettisons a lot of what people associate with the series, and I can see how that can feel jarring. The RPG mechanics are barely there on a surface level, and though you have party members that join up occasionally, you don't really manage them at all. Finding and upgrading equipment isn't very complicated, featuring light crafting where you receive loot from defeated enemies and bring it to a blacksmith for new weapons and armor crafting opportunities. There is a world map, but you only use it to get to specific locations to visit, as opposed to one connected world where you would travel in your airship. Once you arrive in those locations, you explore as much as you can of this zone, meet the NPCs that are there, get more mainline story quests and push it forward, get new items and gear, and new side quests, and you do this until you get to the next action stage. Action stages act as the big next story beat for Clive and his adventure to evolve. The things I'm describing, however, have been changing and have been different since Final Fantasy X onwards. To use those comparative items as the baseline of what is a Final Fantasy is extremely outdated and has been changing every single game since. At the end of the day, I feel that this is still Final Fantasy, and yes, it's right there in the box. The developers did not pull a bait and switch on people. They have been very transparent about the concept being pitched as an accessible action-based game, and their intent was always to make a cinematic story focused on one main character, with the hopes to bring in brand new eyeballs while pleasing the hardcore fans. And I confidently feel they've done that. They've made mistakes along the way, but they've done it. I understand the frustration here. Final Fantasy is an intensely personal series for a lot of people. If you're an RPG fan, you have those couple of games that you grew up with and associate as being the pinnacle of the franchise. For me, it's the 1-2 punch of Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII. But I like what Yoshida had to say on the subject. Something that Hironobu Sakaguchi, the original father of Final Fantasy, said to him, quote, "Final Fantasy is whatever the director making the latest installment thinks is the best game, the best story at the time." This is more or less where I land too. Shoutouts to my best friend Jesse Cox, who made a great video on this topic. Congrats on hitting 1 million subscribers, buddy. Here's to 1 million more. Whether you enjoy turn-based combat or the more action-oriented bent of the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, it all comes down to storytelling. Yoshida and his team have been pretty transparent that 16 takes plenty of inspiration from the Game of Thrones series and other dark fantasy titles. There is a well-realized medieval aesthetic, but familiar Final Fantasy touchstones like chocobos and crystals are fully ingrained into the world. There is a huge focus on politics between different nations and border disputes, mixed with the larger-than-life magic that has always been a feature of the series. And this is also the first numbered Final Fantasy game with an M rating, and it definitely shows. Okay, so taking a step back, completing the game required me to not only see the entire journey of Clive and his friends and family all the way to its suitable epic conclusion, but to gather every bit of lore imaginable. This is a game that very clearly wants players invested in its story, and doing so is deeply rewarding. Yet it is also an action game, and since I completed this on the PS5 at the time because it was an exclusive, there are many trophies associated with specific combat feats. Once the game gets going, you have hundreds of ways to customize your combat experience. Even though Final Fantasy XVI has something like a dozen hours of cutscenes to watch, honestly, it's probably more than that, there is still a bulk of time being spent carving through monsters in spectacular looking battles. This is a surprisingly linear game, where every new location is essentially a beautiful corridor littered with enemies to defeat. Combat is where the real player expression lies. This system progresses the foundation laid in 15, but also borrows a bit from Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy XIII, and even a little bit of Kingdom Hearts as well. Battles are all about using your skills to bring down an enemy's stamina bar, staggering them, then chewing through the HP bar like a chocobo with some Giselle greens. There is a heavy emphasis on dodging and parrying. It does take a little bit getting used to, but it is incredibly satisfying. Even the trashiest trash mob is fun to fight because of how engaging the combat is. Outside of the main plot, there are dozens of side quests to complete, hunts to engage in, pieces of lore to gather, and musical tracks to find for Clive's old-timey jukebox in the hub area. There's level cap on the first playthrough, level 50, which I easily hit without having to grind. Note that I said first playthrough. Yes, there is a new game plus mode called Final Fantasy mode that becomes available upon beating the game. Final Fantasy mode slightly amps up the difficulty by putting way more mini bosses everywhere and doubles the level cap up to 100. This mode also gave me the opportunity to craft the most powerful weapon in the game after a few extra steps. And in true character action game fashion, you have the option to replay dungeons and bosses to earn different ranks. You do this by visiting the Ariete Stone and choosing different modes. But to be clear, I do not consider this to be a part of the completion experience, because this is just to simply get a high score. There is no reward. It is a bragging right mode. It is simply to show your friends and strangers online that you have the ability to get the highest scores possible. The road to completion for Final Fantasy XVI is a very long one, but it is also pretty straightforward, and it does require a massive time commitment. But even if the gameplay isn't your preferred style of RPG, this is a Final Fantasy story through and through.
Hey everyone, today's video is brought to you by Factor. So here's a little something about me that not everyone knows, except for my girlfriend. I hate cooking, mostly because I am bad at it, but I have been so unbelievably busy recently that making a delicious meal that supports wellness is really hard for me. And that's where Factor comes in. Factor is a meal plan service that delivers dietitian-approved meals directly to your doorstep without the hassle of going to the store, shopping, meal prep, cleanup, all that stuff. In the last several months, my eating habits have been less than ideal because of all the travel and late nights I've had playing video games and making videos. So I'm really making an effort to focus on my health this summer, and Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are helping me to kickstart my journey to achieve that goal. Factor provides premium ready-to-eat meals with amazing high-quality ingredients that are incredibly satisfying. Leeks, asparagus, broccolini. I am easily now eating more veggies with Factor, and it's helping me keep those calories low. No matter what your lifestyle is, Factor offers a meal plan just for you. I opted for Chef's Choice plan with the Gourmet Plus upgrade, and I was amazed at all the options I had. Even though I feel like I'm constantly rushing around, having a little gourmet bonus with my meal plan is a perfect way to treat myself. You're telling me I can eat a roasted garlic filet mignon that's perfectly cooked even after reheating? Truffle butter on the side with the premium produced side like broccoli that balances the whole meal? With serpentine options coming soon? My guys, eating well has never meant being boring, and Factor understands that. And here's the other thing too, I've actually used Factor in the past, and I genuinely enjoyed my experience. So the fact they're sponsoring this video means a lot to me. And the best part about all of this, that it takes just a few minutes in the microwave. 2 minutes tops. But Factor also offers lunches on the go, which have been an awesome lifesaver for me. Effortless, wholesome meals like grain bowls that are easy to take with you and eat on the fly. So, go to factor75.com or click the link in the box down below and use code Completionist50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Again, thank you to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Enjoy the show.
It is undeniable to say this game carries the grand storytelling tradition of Final Fantasy into a new generation. Every Final Fantasy game is someone's first, and this is yours. Buckle up for a tale of brotherhood, friendship, alliances, betrayals, trauma, guilt, vengeance, romance, and most of all, defying fate. If you let yourself get swept up, Final Fantasy XVI proves that there really is no substitute for stories like this in the medium. There is a particular flavor of melodrama that Final Fantasy executes perfectly. And if you've been on the fence about this whole game, I say play the demo. It may be one of the best demos I've ever played. It's literally the first couple hours of the game and your save data carries over. You'll instantly get a feel for the tone and themes of the game by the time you finish. I'd say that's one of 16's strongest aspects. It sets and maintains a tone that feels at once original and familiar within the first hour or so. Get ready for a bunch of proper nouns, everyone. We begin with a pitched battle between massive godlike figures, brimming with fire and fury. As this firebird and demon trade blows and blast each other with magic, they crash through the earth, Balrog versus Gandalf style, destroying everything they come in contact with. As this titanic battle rages on, the camera slowly zooms out and we meet Clive, our protagonist. We see a pitched battle from the sidelines, and after a few minutes of running around, Clive takes a blow to the head and suddenly we find ourselves in the past. That's when we learn a little bit about Clive's history to gain some context for the present. Clive is from a notable family, the Rossfields, one of the high houses of the land. What makes his family powerful is their connection to their Mothercrystal, which has blessed his family's bloodline. Clive's younger brother Joshua is a dominant, meaning he can harness magic and transform into a powerful Eikon to protect his people or wage war on his enemies. Eikons in this game are the summons from the Final Fantasy franchise. Since he is the dominant of fire, Joshua transforms into Phoenix. Only a select few people are born as dominants, and the ancient law of the gods say there can only be one dominant per element. But all this doesn't mean that dominants are the only ones who can use magic. Anyone with a crystal, even a small shard, can use it to pull aether out of the air and cast spells. Over time, the people of Valisthea have grown dependent on crystals and magic to do anything from lighting cigarettes to drying laundry. And then there are the bearers. These are otherwise normal human beings who are born with innate magical abilities. They don't need to use a crystal as a conduit. They can use magic, but at the cost of their bodies decaying. This is where things get a little heavy. In the world of Final Fantasy XVI, bearers are slaves, literal slaves. They are bought, sold, owned, and treated as subhuman. As soon as any magical ability is shown, bearers are given massive tattoos on their face and are marked as branded. And this society treats branded terribly. It's pretty disgusting and very uncomfortable, especially for Clive, who's only treated differently because of who his family is. Branded are put on the front lines of battle, kept as house pets, used until they break down, then are discarded or abandoned even. A big part of the game is Clive coming to terms with this system of oppression and trying to overcome it, even though his family, especially his mother, has been complicit for years. Clive's father is a respected and well-loved leader, and everyone loves his little brother Joshua. Clive is appointed as Joshua's special shield, aka bodyguard, and is given the blessing of the Phoenix to use magic. But unfortunately, this happy family unit does not last for long. The Rossfield boys are set upon an expedition to Phoenix Gate, and while they are there, Clive's father is murdered right before his eyes. Even worse, Joshua is torn apart in his Phoenix form by a previously unknown dominant of fire, Ifrit. And in that moment, we are revealed that Clive turned into Ifrit, essentially saying that he is a dominant of fire as well. That should be an impossible feat. What's even more messed up is that Clive's mother is the one who betrayed the family. So already out the gate, Clive's mom is a villain. One of several, but is my favorite villain. The whole game, I'm like, God, I just want to beat up my mom, and that just sounds so weird to say out loud. All of what I said is just the first hour and in the demo of the game. After these tragic events unfold, players get a 13-year flash forward back to the opening moments. We understand that Clive is now a branded, a bearer sold into slavery, forced to use his powers to serve the Imperial Army. He's a part of an elite squad called the Bastards, but all he wants to do is defect and hunt down the people responsible for the deaths in his family. Before long, he gets that chance, but the answers are not what he expected. Clive is lost and consumed by rage and sadness, but he's not alone. With the help of his childhood friend Jill, revealed to be the dominant of the Eikons Shiva, and revolutionary Sid, the dominant of the lightning god Ramu, Clive learns his true purpose and sets out to change the world he lives in. The story progresses from there. It's not all political machinations and backstabbing. There is also an existential threat plaguing Valisthea. A creeping blight is slowly overtaking everything, regardless of peace treaties and borders drawn on maps. I love the themes being explored in this game. Any story that features brothers automatically clicks with me. My brother Jacques and I have a long-standing tradition of dropping everything to play the latest Final Fantasy or Zelda together. The world building is great, but what really drew me in and sold the story were the performances from the main cast. Now look, I've got a little bias here. With my Friends Per Second colleagues, my podcast, which you all should go check out, I interviewed Ben Starr, the performer behind Clive, and found out that he's also a huge trophy hunter and gamer. He puts his heart and soul into performing Clive, and you can tell he's drawing from a raw personal place during some of those darker scenes. Playing Clive at different stages of his life is a huge challenge, but Ben absolutely nails it. For the bulk of this game, Clive is the person you spend all of the time with, and I never grew tired of this performance. You can tell that the entire cast had a great time leaning into the grandiose nature of the dialogue. There are so many characters that I loved to hate. Benedicta, Kupka, the mom, the Emperor himself. It's like there's a whole new set of Lannisters to punch in the face, and it is delicious. Except each Lannister is a dominant that I have to kill. It's awesome. I also fell in love with Susanna Felding's Jill, who is played with just the right amount of seriousness, levity, and righteous ferocity. And I can't leave out Sid. Ralph Ennison, the man behind the voice, is an all-time incarnation of the character. This Sid is like a swaggy pirate captain. He's hot as hell, with a voice that's equal parts gravel and honey. He's powerful, damn funny, and has a cause that he believes in. I really respect this Sid. This is only a small fraction of the cast. Over my completion experience, I met and was charmed by dozens of great characters like Goots, Gav, Karen, and Nectar the Moogle. With a game this large, some people get lost in the shuffle, but there are so many characters who shine brightly. This game was actually recorded and mocapped in English first, which is maybe why I found the main cutscenes to be so effective and powerful. I'm sure all the dubbing is great overall, but it's clear the developers wanted the Western influences to be felt more strongly, and that carries through in the performances. All that said, I wish I could say the quality of the story cutscenes carried through to every other voiced performance in the game. Some of the side quest characters feel a bit weaker compared to the more grounded performances of some of the main characters. The big plot beat cutscenes, especially the massive opening battle, are stunning to behold. The action choreography is amazing. I barely mentioned the Eikons, but every time an Eikon showed up, my jaw was on the floor. These kaiju-sized versions of my favorite summons are show-stopping, and they always feel powerful and threatening every time they're on screen. The Odin versus Bahamut scene is absolutely thrilling and gives the player a sense of how high the stakes are here. Mutually assured destruction is always on the table in Valisthea. Only instead of nuclear missiles, it's people who can turn into laser dragons and a skyscraper-sized rock man. Quieter moments landed for me too, especially later in the game. But it's the side quests that really slowed down the momentum for me. Around the midpoint, say 25, 30-ish hours in, I found myself zoning out a bit during certain side missions or interactions in the hideaway. For a game that starts off with amazing momentum, I found my attention wandering in the middle of my experience. This game was definitely made by some of the creative minds behind 14 in terms of side quest design. They're not all bad by any means, but they can feel very fetch questy at times. Go somewhere, kill a bunch of an enemy, report back, rinse and repeat. And the rewards don't always feel very satisfying either. Usually a paltry handful of gil or some crafting material. I grew to loathe those green exclamation points several hours in. But as my playtime extended, side quests helped me understand Clive and his relationships better, or helped flesh out Valisthea and the people who live there. The quality definitely varies, and maybe that stands out more as a completionist. But towards the end, side quests became critically important. Since 16 doesn't have a party system, side quests and cutscenes are the only way to really get to know important characters. Now, I've been impressed with 16's scope and scale. It feels like an intimate character study as well as a history book detailing the legacy of all of these nations. It spans decades over entire continents. There is a rich, detailed chronological record that can be accessed and poured over in several very helpful different ways. At your hideaway, there are a couple of NPCs who basically act as lore masters. You've got Harpocrates, or Tomes as he's known as. I probably already ruined his name, and he's not a Greek philosopher. You can talk to him and bust out what is essentially an in-game encyclopedia. As Clive learns the characters, the story, meets and fights all different kinds of bosses and characters, Tomes categorizes all of it into his book. He's like the journal that will get you up to speed in case you get lost. And then there's Vivian Ninetails, who you meet several hours in, and she knows anything and everything about all of the nations and all of the wars that are happening at the time. It is very easy to get lost in the sauce or confused about which characters know each other and why certain relationships are important. But Vivian can also tie all that together for you as well. With all of these support systems, I never felt too lost. Completion required me to become a scholar of this world, especially since I had to do 2 entire playthroughs. The way Final Fantasy XVI tells its story is not for everyone. If you're the kind of person who hates the idea of walking across a room, watching a cutscene, opening a door, watching another cutscene, going down the stairs, and watching another cutscene, you might find yourself put off by the presentation. But if you're fully bought in from the very beginning, there is a lot to love here. For me, I let myself grow invested in the intrigue and the politics. I laughed and cried along with the characters who I genuinely came to care about. Some have deeper characterization than others, but that's every game. Even if you're not a fan of Game of Thrones or dark fantasy, this story does a wonderful job of building up and establishing villains as foes who are worthy of destruction. For all the bombastic action of the Eikons and the flashy combat, it's a bit of a slow burn story that pays off the more you invest into the lore. The ebb and flow of the pacing does feel off at times, and that's probably my biggest complaint about the game overall. Trust me when I say that everything comes together in the very end, but I'll concede that the drip feed of information to arrive there is pretty inconsistent. You'll participate in epic battles that reveal character secrets and truths about the world, and then be funneled into half a dozen side quests for townspeople who I couldn't even tell you the name of. But overall, Clive's journey is a very fulfilling one, because the world is undeniably Final Fantasy. One moment, a coup is underway to murder a royal family. The next, you're defending a flock of chocobos with the help of your childhood dog, who can also cast magic and attack. No matter how you finish it, you'll see the same ending everyone else does. But completionists see a fuller picture. I'm extremely curious to see how everyone interprets the end of Clive's story. It has that Inception quality ending in that it allows the players to make their own decisions about what really happened in the end. But the side quests, should you choose to complete them all, will help you make a clearer decision as how you think the game ends. Your reading of the ending will change depending on what you learned prior to those last few final moments. And I think that's freaking beautiful. Even among completionists, I think there will be a lot to talk about for years to come. But story and lore hidden additional context can only carry a game like this so far. The plot is the draw, but the combat is what will or will not support the rest of the structure. Final Fantasy XVI is the first fully action-oriented game in the main franchise, and I love how it feels. Having completed this game, I can say with certainty that even if the combat isn't what you're used to, it is outstandingly enjoyable. It is a bit strange to go from micromanaging an entire party in other Final Fantasy games to just climbing around with Torgal and Jill. But figuring out combos and optimization is incredibly satisfying. Final Fantasy XVI has steady progression, perfectly intertwined with major story beats that makes you feel like a god as time goes on. By putting you in control of the action, 16 is the most empowering Final Fantasy has ever been when it comes to combat. Now, 16 is a cinematic game, and the combat reflects that. It genuinely feels like whatever you see Clive do in a cutscene, you can achieve in battle somewhat. The combat starts off fairly basic, but rapidly grows in complexity and satisfaction. Clive can clash with the sword and shoot magic blasts, but he also has access to iconic abilities, and this is where the game starts to really spread its wings. Clive can access iconic abilities by holding down a trigger and pressing either square or triangle. These abilities are on a cooldown, and each one does something different. No MP required, which honestly, I am very okay with. At first, the skill tree just gives you a few basic ways to deal damage. But as the game progresses and Clive starts to tap into his full potential, players can access different icons and their powers. Not only do you have the powers of Phoenix, but eventually you'll be able to wield the strength of Titan, Odin, Shiva, even Bahamut, among others. It's not like you pick just one icon skill tree and specialize in that. Instead, you're swapping between icons on the fly in battle, wielding their powers with equal fluency, almost like it's a battle stance that you're switching to. Every icon has a unique ability tied to its circle button, so swapping between icons becomes crucial to have access to certain special moves. You spend a good deal of time with just the powers of Phoenix, which at first seems limiting. But once I completed the first real boss fight, the possibilities really started to open up. Mid spoilers for that battle, but also not if you've played the demo. Clive faces off against Benedicta, the dominant of the icon Garuda. At first, it's just a duel between two sword wielders, but after being defeated, Benedicta manifests Garuda, a gigantic harpy who commands the power of wind. All hope seems lost as this terrifying monster crushes Clive in its claws. This is when Clive fully awakens as the child of fate he was born to be and taps into the power of Ifrit. Which, by the way, my mind is blown that his name is Ifrit and not Ifrit. All of this years of Final Fantasy down the drain for me. I had no clue. Suddenly, the battle completely shifts. Instead of a tiny person battling a huge monster, Clive becomes Ifrit, a flame demon who can go toe-to-toe with Garuda. The unbelievably good choral music kicks in, and this knockdown drag fight commences. These battles are a great change of pace, and giving players the opportunity to play as these iconic summons is one of the best parts of this entire game. These show-stopping boss battles are few and far between, but that makes them all the more memorable. As you collect the powers of all the different icons, the number of available skills to purchase, upgrade, and master grows and grows. This is where the meat of customization comes in. Once you unlock 3 or 4 icons, you'll start to see the combos and huge variety on display. With the press of a trigger, I can swap between Phoenix, where I can execute a cool dash to close the distance, to Ramu, who lets me slow down time to blast enemies with balls of lightning, to Garuda, which lets me grapple enemies close to me and pull airborne foes out of the sky. Swapping between icons is instantaneous, and each set of powers is tangibly different from one another. This is one of the rare instances where my completionist mindset was actually a huge benefit. Every ability requires a certain amount of ability points to unlock, and once unlocked, it can be equipped. But the beauty of this system is that with enough AP, you can master a given ability and move it to any slot with any icon you'd like. So if you really love one of Titan's abilities but still want to use Phoenix's shift, you can master a Titan ability and map it to the Phoenix icon. Multiply this concept by several abilities per icon with 8 icons to unlock, and you've got yourself a stew going. But unlocking every single ability is a massive undertaking. It takes over 100,000 ability points to unlock every iconic ability in the game. To put that into perspective, the first time you defeat Garuda, you only gain 100 ability points. But honestly, farming enemies and going on hunts is so much more fun that I never minded the grind. The fascinating thing is that I only ever grinded one time in the game, and it was towards the end, for about an hour. And let me tell you, it was so worth it. Getting all of that AP and then using it to break open the combat felt so rewarding. It's a hell of a lot of work, but even battling small groups of weak enemies provided a burst of adrenaline. Finding and fine-tuning my favorite set of abilities is so enjoyable that I just found myself stepping up to every single fight with the same level of enthusiasm. Final Fantasy XVI also has some incredible accessibility options. Many Final Fantasy fans choose to play RPGs because of their slower pace, and are wary of trying to perfect the acrobatic fluid combat this game demands. But very early on, Clive is given a set of equipable rings that make the entire game easier. So I find this to be a great idea, though part of me wishes using these items didn't take up a gear slot. I kept the Ring of Timely Focus on for a majority of my first playthrough, and honestly, it was really fun. I know everyone's gonna make fun of me for not getting good, but it felt like having a fun mechanic that allowed me to focus on the story without hindering the quality of the game by any means. It also taught me that when I did remove the ring, I inherently just knew how to dodge and parry instinctually because I learned it from the thousands of battles I encountered. Having an extra beat where time slows down allowed me to dodge everything and land special attacks. I love that this game doesn't punish you for using these items. Action RPGs tend to be difficult for some inexperienced players, and these rings give players more options to approach how they want to play the game. It is very much possible to max out the skill tree in a single playthrough, and it is required for a trophy, but you still have a tremendous amount of freedom to mix and match abilities just by playing the game naturally. And if you have buyer's remorse on certain skills, you can respec any of them at any time. There is no penalty for respecing your skills, and as long as you're not actively in a battle, you can do this from the main menu. Experimenting with new skills and finding your favorites is very satisfying. One of my favorite things about exploring the open world zones was that you come across the accrete stone slabs that seem inactive at first, but as you get further into the story, they will turn on. These stone slabs are challenges that are associated with all of the icons. These icon-specific challenges at first I did not enjoy, but then I realized it was teaching me all of the mechanics and how useful they are in combat. Doing these challenges are required for completion as you unlock a replayable challenge mode that's just like the arcade and replay modes in the accrete stones in the main base, and those challenges are not required for completion, but you do get a wonder/memory item for Clive, which you will need for a trophy. Taking a step back to the abilities, my loadout changed wildly over the course of my playtime, but my favorite icon to use was the Titan because of its block, which takes blocking and parrying to an entirely new punishing level. And one of my favorite skills in the game was the Flames of Rebirth, which you can unlock fairly early on and is useful for both healing and attacking bosses. I wish some late game iconic abilities were available a little bit earlier, but being able to use them in my Final Fantasy mode playthrough still felt great. There are certainly mechanics that I think could have been handled a bit better. Item management is sort of a pain in that it's boring and doesn't fit with the rest of the combat. I feel like there are tonics and potions to heal yourself or get a strength boost, but collecting them in the overworld never feels like I'm discovering something cool. Why would I go out of my way in a dungeon to investigate a sparkly item when majority of the time it's for a measly 2 gil instead of a useful item? It might be useful in the sense that it gives me my potions back or will heal me, so it's useful in that way. But honestly, that's my big gripe when it comes to completion. You've got these big open zone maps that are fun and engaging, and you want to explore them because they're so cool. But most of the time, you're not really rewarded with an item, or if you are, it doesn't feel important. Most of the time you explore because you have an active hunt on and you're trying to find a beast to fight, if anything. And that's just it. Finding chests and items doesn't feel as important as it used to. It also feels like a bit of a missed opportunity that elemental weaknesses and status effects are almost non-existent. There are some moments where you can exploit iconic vulnerabilities, but it always seemed a little odd to me that you can attack enemies like the Living Flame with fire spells with no consequences. I loved juggling different icons, but it always felt weird that this was a bit absent. It also makes sense because you can't pause the game and switch icons in real time. So if you need a pivot because you have 3 icons equipped and you want to change to a 4th, you can't while you're in combat. Now, I'm more on the fence about status effects, but I do feel like they should have been included in some way. And there is an argument to be made that, yeah, there are status effects if you're paying attention. There are battles where a boss will leave a pool of sludge or molten lava on the ground that you have to avoid, but it's not quite the same as having to counteract poison or use a haste spell on yourself. I understand the developers didn't want to compromise the speed and flow of the action to deal with overcoming a negative status, but maybe having to manually tell Torgal to throw you an antidote or something would have been a good compromise. I feel like I'm credible as a dog lover, but you know what? As much as I love Torgal, I never really thought of him as a party member, even though he's with you for most of the game. Now, to be clear, Torgal is a very, very good boy, and I cannot wait for the thousands of people someday to name their new dogs Torgal. But as a combatant, he's hilariously ineffectual at times. He has his own experience bar, but even after some mid-game events that make Torgal stronger, his attacks and heal abilities pale in comparison to Clive's own. But to be clear, Torgal is a very, very good boy. Do not get that twisted. One aspect of the game that I really grew to love because of the combat was the hunts. Nectar the Moogle is our hunt master who will tell us all about the monsters and lore that exist in Valisthea. And man, oh man, I loved every single hunt. Every time I went on to fight a monster, it felt like I was genuinely monster hunting in that degree of, depending on the monster's rank, the battle felt important. These fights only get more and more difficult as the game went on, and truth be told, I wish there were more of them. These fights are the best. I want to fight more. Final Fantasy XVI's combat is like the rest of the game. You get out of it what you put into it. If you're a completionist, you will likely have an amazing time customizing Clive to your liking and then seeing how effective your loadout is in your New Game Plus playthrough. Using the abilities of your enemies to achieve victory is awesome and has profound thematic ties to the rest of the game. I loved throwing myself into the deep of things and staying there. But if you're more skeptical, I encourage you to take your time completing the game and to make use of the accessibility features, shame and guilt-free. If you want to just vibe out and enjoy the game, there are so many references and nods to longtime fans of the series that I couldn't help but smile the longer I spent crossing blades with my foes and walking across every gorgeous vista. For any game of this size and scale, the completion experience is bound to be a little bit overwhelming, but Final Fantasy XVI's linear approach was comforting. But more importantly, I found that I took solace in little things. Yes, this is an action game, and it can be alienating if you grew up on the turn-based classic of the 90s, but the attention of detail spread throughout 16 is marvelous and provides a strong through line for the vibes of the entire series. 16 has your standard Final Fantasy fare like chocobos, moogles, and airships, but some things are presented in a different way that made me appreciate them more. I like that Nectar the Moogle feels a little mysterious and that he can't be understood by most people who talk to him. I love that airships in this game are basically lost technology and that your second hideaway is built out of the wreck of an ancient crashed vessel. Even crystals themselves take on a new significance. They play a pivotal role in the plot, and the way the entire world wars over who has access to them and their power makes them feel like more than mere MacGuffins. The shots of Mothercrystals towering over cityscapes are awe-inspiring. Their presence makes the world feel magical, as they should. There are many Easter eggs for watchful players. There's a scarecrow wearing the classic black mage outfit in the field early on in the game. And after rescuing Jill from the Iron Kingdom and helping her recover at the hideaway, there's a great scene with her wearing what looks like the traditional white mage robes. The music is a perfect example of how 16 reaches out to new players and respects longtime fans at the same time. Rather than series stalwart Nobuo Uematsu, this game is composed by the same person who composed the score for 14, Masayoshi Soken. It's amazing. There are still familiar motifs and allusions to classic Final Fantasy themes. I'd even argue there's allusions to Star Wars as well. But this score has a will of its own and transitions flawlessly from contemplative character themes to eardrum-shattering boss riffs. Even the victory theme returns, sung out with abandon by a gutsy choir. I particularly enjoy how the Eikons are reinterpreted here. Instead of just summons to call upon, we see how these insanely powerful beings impact the world. Watching Titan indiscriminately step on friends or foes, seeing Shiva use her ice powers as a shield, experiencing Ifrit going absolutely feral. I love how classic Final Fantasy characters are given a brand new presentation. There's a balance in this game between nods to the past and creating memories for this specific entry. Clive has a wall of memories that fills with collectibles as you complete the main quests and side quests. Each curiosity is its own reference to an event or trial in this game, and helped remind me of Clive's role in shaping the lives of people he meets. I love when there's an in-game collectible shelf, and the Wall of Memories is a great one. There are even a few references to the past, like a model airship, even if part of me wishes there was a full-sized one to fly around in. The way this game even handles Sid is perhaps my favorite way that Final Fantasy honors its past, present, and future. Sid has shown up in some fashion in almost every Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy II. Sometimes he's a party member, sometimes he's a glorified fast travel system. In this game, he's an active companion and a pivotal character for the plot, but he proves to be more than that time and time again. Clive's arc throughout this game is drenched head to toe with what makes Final Fantasy important, and in turn, to the plot, Clive comes to mean something to the people, becoming a beacon of hope that people can turn to, no matter what he looks like. He becomes a title, a symbol, and I was reminded that just because something or someone looks different, they can still carry an idea forward and inspire others to hope for the future. For a game this expansive, completing it is a big ask. Well, not so much big as so much as it's long. It is this kind of completion experience that could easily eat up someone's entire year should they choose to take their time. But I think it's worth it. Almost every system pays off in some fashion, and even if a second, more difficult playthrough scares you, completing it and earning the Platinum Trophy is extremely rewarding. In many ways, the story is its own reward. Even the most basic, boring side quest gives a little more flavor to Clive's world and circumstances. The conclusion of Final Fantasy XVI is certainly worth reaching, and I fully understand if for most players that is more than enough. Finishing your first playthrough will earn you a gold star on your profile, a nice visual bonus and proof that you've beaten the game. Who doesn't love a good gold star? But going the extra mile and completing Final Fantasy mode is absolutely worth the time. After finishing my first playthrough, I had my favorite icons and a handful of strategies that worked for me. And without grinding at all, I reached level 100 just by doing everything again. But what was missing was any semblance of a challenge. This game only has 2 difficulty modes at the start, and even on the action-focused setting, it's never that tough. Final Fantasy mode amps up the enemy challenge and made for a much more enjoyable game, and I appreciated having to dial in my combos and try new strategies. Still, it's not very hard, but it is more engaging for sure. The most difficult unlockable is the Ultima weapon, only available in Final Fantasy mode. To obtain this weapon, you have to embark on a series of quests and hunts to get items that are only craftable towards the end of the game. I had to forge and reforge certain weapons and collect extremely rare crafting materials. It takes a really long time to acquire all the things you need, but the Ultima weapon is worth it. It has massive attack and stagger stats and takes down even the toughest enemies easily. What's weird is that it's not required for a trophy, but the main weapon of the first playthrough is? It's kind of bizarre. Filling out the orchestration is simple, and I always appreciate a good in-game soundtrack. I would have loved to have the other soundtracks from other games, but totally understand. Many songs unlock simply by reaching certain story moments. Many more are available for purchase from Karen's shop or other local shops, and a select few can be found in chests out in the field. Filling out all of Tome's requests for his gigantic bestiary and lore stuff is very, very easy. None of it is missable. If you get to the end of the game and you're missing a few things, just talk to everyone at the hideout, I promise. I do think having to recomplete every side quest and hunt in Final Fantasy mode is a bit much. It's not hard, and skipping the dialogue and cutscenes the second time around definitely saves you a lot of time, but it feels a lot less rewarding the second time around. I didn't really need the crafting materials outside of what was required for the Ultima weapon, and I already knew all the twists and turns accordingly. But strangely, I didn't feel that having to do these things over again is a deal breaker, because the core narrative really stuck with me, and I wanted to spend as much time in the world again. When I finally completed Final Fantasy mode and I got that final trophy in Platinum, I felt an intense satisfaction. It took a long time, but I love this cast of characters. So after finally completing Final Fantasy XVI, where do I land? It's so strange. This game is and isn't a Final Fantasy game. It is and isn't an RPG. It is and isn't a complete it. I know not everyone cares about finding every bit of lore, but I think that seeing the full picture of Clive, Joshua, and Jill is so important to appreciate everything this game has to offer. If the future of Final Fantasy is as satisfying as this game is, I think we'll all be in great shape. But let's be real, it probably won't even be the same game. It'll be different. If that quote from earlier is right, then we'll have a new style and a new story that hopefully will reflect the best version of the Final Fantasy game that matches of the time.
So this is where I land with Final Fantasy XVI. This series means a lot to me, and I think this is one of the best stories of the year so far. The gameplay may be totally different than any other RPG out there, and really what anyone expected, but I love it, and I'm extremely curious to see what this means for the future of the franchise. I understand it being on the fence, but I am so glad I took the plunge and completed this game. This game is a great example of something that becomes more rewarding as you complete it. This is the reason I give Final Fantasy XVI my completionist rating of completed. Not everyone will feel the same way, and that's totally fine, but the way that this game approaches completionists is what makes it stand tall among the entire Final Fantasy series. Thank you everyone for watching. If you want more Final Fantasy content, you can check out my video on Crisis Core Reunion. And hey, thank you as always to our Patreon supporters. Joining the Completionist Patreon community is free, and we'll let you know about all the cool things we have going on. Bye-bye for now. Have a great weekend.